What if I told you that a routine blood test holds one of the biggest clues to a stage 4 cancer? And in one particular patient of mine, it was missed for over a year. Yeah, let me tell you about a patient I saw, a man in his 50s, about a year before we met. His employer ran a routine wellness check. His iron came back low. His primary care doctor started him on an iron supplement, but 2 months later, they repeated his labs. His iron had improved, the supplement was stopped, no further follow-up was recommended. And no one asked the question that mattered most: why did a healthy man in his 50s actually need iron in the first place? That question would change everything. So when he came into my office, he mentioned something almost in passing. For nearly a year, he'd been dealing with this uncomfortable fullness in his upper abdomen. He said he could never quite finish a meal because he felt so full so quickly, and that immediately caught my attention. I asked him, "Have you noticed any blood in your stool?" He said no. And then I asked it in a different way. "Has it ever looked like coffee grounds in your stool?" And then he paused and he thought, actually, yes. When we met again for his report of findings, he admitted that, yes, he had been seeing blood. And I never really started ever seeing him as a patient after that. You know why? Because I referred him directly to a gastroenterologist. 4 weeks later, my phone rang. It was his fiance. He had been diagnosed with stage 4 colon cancer. He was starting chemotherapy that week. He was also putting an end-of-life document together. That phone call has stayed with me ever since, hence I'm sharing this story with you. Because here's what I think about every time that I see someone with low iron. His iron wasn't ignored. It was treated initially. His numbers improved. The supplement worked. But the question that mattered most was never answered. Why was a healthy man in his 50s iron deficient in the first place? Because iron deficiency isn't the diagnosis. It is the clue. Now, to be clear, most people with low iron do not have colon cancer. But unexplained iron deficiency, especially in men and postmenopausal women, deserves an explanation, not just a prescription. And that philosophy never stopped at the abnormal lab, but asking why it became abnormal is the foundation of how I practice medicine. Today, we're going to talk about what iron actually does in your body, why so many in their 40s and 50s end up iron deficient, what your iron labs really are telling you, and how to think about supplementation the right way instead of simply guessing. Hi, I'm Dr. Emily Wheeler, and this is Rise Above. Let's start with what iron actually is, because I think this is where a lot of confusion begins. The word heme, H-E-M-E, heme as in hemoglobin, comes from the Greek word haima, which simply means blood. Hemoglobin is heme plus a protein called globin. And sitting right in the center of that heme molecule is iron. So here's a simple way to picture it. Think of iron like a magnet for oxygen. It grabs oxygen in your lungs, carries it to every tissue in your body, your brain, your muscles, your skin, your hair, your follicles. All of it needs oxygen delivered, and iron is doing the delivering. Now, here's the wow fact I like to share with patients. Your red blood cells only live about 120 days. That's about 4 months. Your body is constantly breaking down old red blood cells and building brand new ones every single day, month after month, year after year, your entire life. And every one of those new red blood cells needs iron to be built correctly. So think about what that means if you're a woman who's still cycling. Every month you're losing blood and your body is already it's already on that rebuild schedule, that 4-month rebuild schedule. And even without that monthly loss that you're having, you're still requiring to build red blood cells. Add regular blood loss on top of that, and you start seeing why this becomes a common issue for women. So when I think about iron, I'm not just thinking about one lab number. I'm thinking about a factory that never stops running. And iron is one of the raw materials that factory needs to keep producing. So iron has a few jobs, but 3 matter the most. Let's talk about red blood cell formation. Okay, so as we just talked about, your body is building new red blood cells constantly on that 4-month cycle. And iron is a non-negotiable ingredient in that process. No iron, no new red blood cells. I like to tell patients, think of iron and B12 as two of the key ingredients that your body needs to build a red blood cell. Iron builds the part that carries oxygen. B12 helps the cell actually form and mature correctly. You miss either ingredient and the recipe just doesn't work. That's job number one. Job number two, oxygen transport. This is that magnet for oxygen idea that we talked about just a bit earlier. Once red blood cells are built, iron is what actually grabs onto the oxygen in your lungs and carries it to the rest of your body. Without enough of it, your tissues are essentially running out on fuel. So that's super important. Oxygen transport is super important, obviously. The third reason why iron has a few jobs, the third one, is for energy production. So this is the piece people miss. Think of your cell's energy-making process like a relay race, with oxygen being passed from runner to runner until it reaches the finish line, like tiny structures inside of your cell. Okay, these tiny structures, they're called mitochondria, and that's where energy is really made. Iron is the runner carrying that final leg. So you have low iron. It just doesn't mean tired blood. It means that the last leg of the relay it doesn't have a runner to finish the race, and your cells can't produce energy as efficiently. So when someone tells me they're exhausted, foggy, not just themselves, iron is always somewhere on my list of questions to ask them. So I want you to picture a patient I'll call Sarah, okay? She's late 40s, busy, and then seemingly out of nowhere, her periods change. She's bleeding through her pants in the middle of the day at 45 years old, something that never happened to her in her 20s or 30s. What used to be predictable now shows up heavier, longer, and closer together than it used to. And if that description sounds familiar, I want you to keep listening, because the people most likely to run low on iron include women with heavy menstrual bleeding, which becomes more common, not less, as we actually move through perimenopause. It gets very volatile. It's one of those things that nobody warns us about. Women who are pregnant, because blood volume increases dramatically to support both mom and baby. Anyone who donates blood regularly. People with GI conditions that affect absorption, things like celiac disease or an H. pylori infection. And here's one that surprises most people. The bacteria living in your gut actually competes with you. It competes with you for iron. Yeah, it can steal your food source. So most of the iron you eat doesn't even make it to your bloodstream. Your gut bacteria use it first. So if your gut microbiome is out of balance, something like small intestinal bacterial overgrowth or SIBO, those bacteria can be quietly eating up the iron before your body ever gets the chance. This is exactly why when iron stays stubbornly low, despite supplementing, I often want to look deeper at gut health. We got to look at the gut. This is where functional testing comes in to play. So we just don't just increase iron. We got to look at the big picture of why is your iron low to begin with. Okay. Anyone who's had bariatric surgery, now that's another reason for needing iron, since that changes how the gut absorbs nutrients. People eating vegan or vegetarian diet, since plant-based iron is just absorbed less efficiently than iron from animal sources. We have to keep that in mind. So go back to Sarah. So Sarah checks 2 or 3 of those things on that list without even trying. And a lot of women do. And that's exactly why this conversation matters so much for this stage of life. Now, here's where the forecasting mindset comes in. Okay. Your symptoms are data. They're not a random, just smorgasbord of information. They're clues your body is leaving for you. So when iron runs low, women commonly notice fatigue that doesn't improve with sleep, hair loss, more coming out in the shower or on your brush than usual, brain fog, that frustrating feeling that really just, your brain just can't function clearly, restless legs, especially at night, exercise intolerance, meaning like you're feeling wiped out by an activity that used to feel super easy for you to do. So how many women have told me that their fatigue is just hormones, right? Without anyone ever checking where they're also becoming iron deficient. And if their practitioner is even ordering lab work on them, the full panel. So I ask that question a lot because in my experience, it's often both of it. So this is the part of the episode I think it genuinely is the most useful. So let's slow down a bit here. Let's start with anemia itself. Since that word gets used a lot, at its core, Anemia just means your body doesn't have enough oxygen to get where it needs to go because you don't have enough of those magnets, those oxygen-carrying red blood cells to do the job. There are actually about 7 different types of anemia, each with a different underlying cause. Iron deficiency is just one of them, but it's one of the most commons. Most people have really ever had a CBC, a complete blood count, and that test can show you if you're anemic. What often it doesn't tell you is whether your iron stores are running low, which can happen well before anemia even shows up. So let's look at the big picture. Let's look at the patterns. Let's be proactive instead of reactive here. To really understand your iron status, here are a few pieces to look at together. Let's look at these markers. We have ferritin. This measures your iron stores. We also have serum iron. This measures the iron actually circulating in your blood right now. There's TIBC, or total iron binding capacity, and this tells us how much your blood is reaching for iron. And then there's transferrin saturation. Think saturated. This shows what percentage of your iron-carrying protein is actually full. How much of it is saturated? So no single one of these tells the whole story. They're likely different instruments on a weather station. The wind speed alone doesn't tell you if a storm is coming. You need the whole picture. So let's talk about reference ranges, because this is where I want to be very careful with my words. So conventional medicine isn't wrong here. Reference ranges are built to identify disease, and they're good at that. They want to keep you alive, essentially. They want to make sure we want to keep you alive. Functional medicine asks an additional question. Is this level optimal for this person's physiology, symptoms, and stage of life? And here's the real pattern I see often. A woman comes in with a completely normal CBC, normal serum iron, but her ferritin is sitting at 12. Now, technically, that's in range on many lab reports, and she has hair loss, fatigue, and brain fog. Technically normal. Practically, her body is telling a different story. So instead of telling her your labs are fine, we treated her ferritin, her symptoms, her stage of life, not just the number on the page. We started iron support. We watched how she felt and rechecked her levels a few months later. Her ferritin climbed, and so did every piece of her energy and everything that was on her list. And we'll talk more exactly how to do supplement the right way here just a little bit later. And I want to mention on the flip side, ferritin can rise during inflammation, even when iron stores aren't actually elevated. So a high ferritin doesn't automatically mean iron overload. It might mean that your body is dealing with inflammation from something else entirely. And that's exactly why we don't just look at one number in isolation. So I want to spend a little extra time on ferritin because I think it's this one analogy I think makes it makes sense for everyone. So think of ferritin like a savings account and serum iron like your checking account. Your checking account serum iron is what you're used to using day to day. Your savings account, your ferritin, is your reserve. You can have money in your checking but still have an empty savings account. And you can run your checking account low for a while before it actually shows up as a problem because you're quietly draining your savings to cover it. That's what's happening with a lot of women. Their day-to-day iron looks fine, but their reserves, their ferritin, have been slowly drained by years of heavy periods. And or gut inflammation. But nobody ever checked the account balance until the symptoms showed up. Now, most standard labs will call anything roughly like 12 to 15 normal. But in my experience, and in a lot of the functional medicine literature, symptoms like fatigue, hair loss, brain fog often show up well before that. And most practitioners in this space are looking for a savings account balance closer to 50 to 100, not just like right above the bottom range. We want to get to optimal. I'm not going to hand you one rigid ideal number for you because that number really depends on you, your symptoms, your history, your stage of life, how active you are, what's going on. But what I will say is this: we treat the patient, not just the lab value. If you and your provider determine that supplementing is the right move, how you do it matters just as much as whether you do it. Let's talk with food because that's always the foundation. Iron from animal sources, think red meat, chicken, turkey, salmon, shrimp, and eggs. Those are absorbed far more efficiently than iron from plant sources like spinach or lentils. That doesn't mean plant sources don't count. It just means pairing them with a little vitamin C can meaningfully improve the absorption in them. And since we're talking food, I get asked about cast iron pans a lot. So let's settle it. Is it hype or does it actually work? The honest is actually the truth. The answer is both. Cooking in a cast iron pan really can transfer small amounts of iron into your food, especially with moist, acidic dishes like tomato sauce or applesauce, if you put those in the pan. Some studies show up to a 16% increase in iron content just with cooking with those pans. But it's a gentle assist. It's not a full treatment. If your ferritin is actually low, a cast iron skillet isn't going to fix that on its own. Think of it as a nice bonus habit, not a substitute for addressing an actual deficiency. Now, food alone, if it's not enough, there are a few common supplement forms of iron. And this is where people really need to know the difference with it, because so many times they consume forms of iron that make them feel worse. So there's heme iron. When I say heme, I'm saying Heme, heme iron. This comes from animal sources and tends to be well absorbed and easier on the stomach. Okay, so we get it from animals. Then there's something called ferrous bisglycinate. It's a chelated, gentler form that many people tolerate better than other options and older options for that. And then there's a very commonly found one called ferrous sulfate. Think S, sulfate. It's inexpensive, it's widely used, but it's also the form most associated with stomach upset and constipation. Sulfate causes stomach issues. Sulfate, stomach. Okay, it's not the greatest form. Then there's liquid iron and chewables. These are usually another way to deliver that same bisglycinate form that we talked about, and it's made easier to take for people who really struggle with pills. Some older or budget liquid formulas still use certain forms like gluconate or sulfate instead, so it's worth checking the label. They can also come with their own taste or dental staining considerations with it, but stuff that you're getting from a functional medicine doctor, they're getting it from a good source, most likely. Well, I am. This is not a more is always better nutrient. Iron supplementation should be intentional, not automatic, and it should always be measured and checked. Now, I want to spend some time on the single reason that people quit their iron supplement. And honestly, most of them are never told why it's happening in the first place. So iron can be irritating to the GI tract. When it's not fully absorbed, the unabsorbed iron portion continues through your intestines, where it can change stool consistency and affect gut motility. And that's the mechanism behind constipation. It's not random, and it's not just, that's just how iron is. But the good news is there's almost always a workaround. Switching formulations here is important. Bisglycinate or heme iron are often gentler than the ferrous sulfate, stomach issues, the S, right? Staying well hydrated is super important because iron pulls water into its effect on the gut. Making sure fiber intake is adequate. Considering magnesium, which can help offset the constipating effect. You can also listen to my magnesium podcast on Rise Above. And sometimes simply dividing the dose, taking a smaller amount more than once a day is really can be effective as well. So dividing the dose, taking in a couple different times a day. If iron has made you miserable in the past, please don't assume that it means iron just isn't for you. It often means the form or the strategy just needs to change. And there's more beyond that, but this is the core things that I find clinically. Iron deficiency gets most of the attention, but it's not the only concern. Before starting or continuing long-term supplementation, it's worth reviewing your multivitamin or any prenatal that you're taking in your family history. Hereditary hemochromatosis, it's a genetic condition that causes the body to absorb too much iron. It's more common than most people realize. And if your ferritin levels come back high, it's the first step, and don't panic if you do find it. It just requires a full workup. Sometimes high ferritin really is genetic, confirmed with genetic testing, but also it's just you're taking more iron than you need, or you're having inflammatory reactions that can cause that ferritin level to be high. And honestly, in my practice, in my clinic, what I see so much inflammation that it lends more in ratio to inflammatory responses. with this. So sometimes it's really none of those, and it's just your body's clearing iron efficiently in the first place. Now, those are three different problems with three different next steps, which is exactly why we don't jump into a label with iron. So if it does turn out to be truly hereditary hemochromatosis, the treatment is usually therapeutic phlebotomy, giving blood. Essentially, having blood drawn on a regular schedule, sometimes as often as a weekly, to bring those iron levels back down. It's a very manageable condition, but it's just, again, not something I see all the time, but there are those handful of people out there that are doing it. More is not always better. That's true just for iron, like it's for anything we talk about on this podcast. It's finding that Goldilocks zone. Not too much, not too little, just the right amount. So here's a few things I've learned in practice. I'm going to share them with you, okay? I don't automatically recommend iron just because someone is tired. Fatigue has a long list of possible cases and causes, and iron is just one piece of that big picture. So another one, my biggest pet peeve is when someone is told their iron is fine based on a CBC alone without ever looking at ferritin and without ever looking at an iron panel. Come on, let's do all the labs. The most common mistake I see patients make is stopping their iron the moment that it upsets their stomach instead of switching forms. So that's another clinical pearl that I see. One pattern also that I've seen clinically that I'll say clearly, it's an observation in my own practice, patients with low iron, when we support methylation, meaning B12 and folate status, when we bring in more of the B vitamins, I've also seen their serum iron respond and improve, get better, because we're doing that. My working theory on this is that it's less about methylation fixing iron directly and more about supporting B12 that helps the body actually build and mature red blood cells. And then that in turn helps iron get used to the way it's supposed to be. So it's one more reason I never look at iron just in isolation. We got to put the picture together. Now, here's one of my favorite patterns to catch clinically. This is exactly what we talked about with Sarah, is a normal CBC sitting right next to a ferritin that's telling a completely different story. We got to look at those patterns to see what's going on here. So before we wrap up, I want to leave you with a few questions you can bring to your own healthcare provider, because that conversation really matters more than anything I can tell you here. So ask them. Here are a few things you can ask them. Have we looked at my full iron panel, ferritin, serum iron, TIBC, or just CBC? Ask them, could my heavier or longer periods be contributing to my low iron? Ask them, is my ferritin actually appropriate for my symptoms, not just technically in range? Ask them, do we know why my iron is low, or are we just replacing it? Can we do better? Can we dig deeper? And if you don't know, can you refer me to someone who can? Send them to a functional medicine doc. And ask them, should we rule anything else out before I start supplementing long term, like colon cancer, right? So here's what I want you to take away from today. Iron deficiency isn't a diagnosis. It's a clue. Iron saved my patient's life. Asking why he was iron deficient is what led to the diagnosis. And that's exactly why I say iron isn't just another lab or supplement. Sometimes it's that lab that you're measuring that nutrient on that could help save your life. Before you simply replace what's low, get curious about why it's low in the first place. That question is the difference between chasing a number and actually understanding your body. If you're curious about what your own iron story might be, functional testing can often help in that, fill in the gaps that your CBC alone just can't show you. So thanks for spending time this week with me today. Until next time, I'm Dr. Emily Wheeler, and remember, your body is talking. Let's keep listening.